Yes. Okay. So I found it instructive to note that the idea of a smart city originated as long ago as 1997 with social scientists observing that the spread of the internet ought to give individuals and communities a stronger voice in the way that they were governed. It's a very social idea. Between then and now, technology terms like e-commerce, Web 2, service-oriented architecture have all risen to prominence and then gone away again. And smart cities is still with us. That's despite the fact actually that, I just made some comments around Milton Keynes, the amount of money spent through sustainable commercial vehicles on smart cities is vanishingly small. So why has this idea hung around for so long? Why is it still of interest to forums like this one? I think just tomorrow, George Osborne is appearing at a Daily Telegraph event on smart cities, so it's actually going up and up in prominence. So I thought I'd start with some reasons why we care about this idea, and I'm going to start with something local to London, the Barnet Graph of Doom. So it's going to get a bit of doom and gloom for a while. Barnet were famously the first local authority in the country who projected forward the rising cost of delivering social care and the falling level of grants from central government. And this is actually a fundamental change we're going through, driven by demographics. There are less of us working and paying taxes, more of us living longer into retirement, needing services to support us. There's a few other things going on as well, but that's a fundamental challenge with the cost base of public services at the moment. And we see that very acutely in a lot of local authorities and central government agencies at the moment, as the Conservatives are looking at another round of spending cuts. So that's one driver for change. Here's another driver for change. The UK has a shockingly low level of social mobility, and it kills people. If you look at this graph, and you can find it online at life.mappinglondon.co.uk, it's a piece of work by the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis at University College London. It's plotting life expectancy at birth across London's tube network and correlating it to levels of childhood poverty. If you're born today over around the East End, you're likely to live until you're 75 years old. If you're born in Belgravia or Fitzrovia, you're likely to live till you're 96 years old. It means if you're born in the wrong place, you're likely to die nearly 2 decades younger on average. That discrepancy is mirrored in every city in the UK. In Glasgow, we have the worst figure. It's 28 years difference for baby boys born today in the poorest and richest parts of the city. Those geographic differences have remained the same for decades. They eclipse anything across the country, they eclipse any difference across Europe, they eclipse almost any difference across the world. We've not been able to do something about it. So at the same time that local authorities are trying to drive down the costs of the services they deliver, they're acutely aware of the need that those services do not achieve the right outcomes. It's not all local authorities' responsibility, of course, it's a complex picture. But some of it relates to the urban environment. When a university team went and interviewed people in some of the poorest parts of Glasgow with the worst diet, the worst health regimes, the shortest life expectancy, they found that one reason that people didn't exercise much was that they were afraid to leave their houses when it was dark, in the mornings or in the evenings when they weren't working. And that's something that the quality of the urban environment can dictate. And these challenges are not going to get easier, they're going to get much harder. Between now and 2050, the United Nations estimate that 3 billion more people will live in cities. That rise will be accounted for almost entirely by the growth of populations of megacities of between 10 and 35 million population in South America, Africa and Asia. What it's going to create is incredible competition for economic activity, for jobs. We're already seeing this, of course, with the steel industry in particular being a pertinent case. But it's also going to challenge the availability of resources, basic resources like food and water. So at the same time this rise in urban population happens, about the same number of people, 3 billion more people, will acquire what we would consider a middle class level of affluence. One of the consequences is that their diets are going to switch from being largely vegetarian and fish-based to being meat-based. A meat-based diet requires an awful lot more grain and an awful lot more water to produce than fish-based and vegetarian diets. We're already using about 70% of the world's fresh water to create food. The United Nations estimates that to cope with population increase, we need to deliver twice as much food to people's plates as we do at the moment. Twice times 70% doesn't go. And that's at the time when we fully expect there to be less fresh water available to us in future due to the rise of sea levels. Kiribati in the bottom right there is the first island in the Pacific states to enact a full-scale migration program to their neighbouring islands in New Zealand because they are literally disappearing beneath the water. Average land height was only ever about a metre above sea level. So people who live around the shore are already starting to see storms and high tides encroach upon their property. And this rise is why ASDA, I think this is 3 years ago now, it might just be 2 years ago, estimated that 95% of their supply chain of fresh food and produce was already at risk from the effects of climate change. So we've been talking about environmental issues for decades. There's been various attempts to try and fix them. Arguably, not an awful lot has been done yet, although there's been some increasingly encouraging promises made. But these are no longer long-term issues. When Hurricane Katrina hit and took out the oil refineries in America, a lot of farmers in America switched from producing crops for food to producing crops for bioethanol. 2 years later, due to the increase in grain supplies around the world, you had food riots in Mexico City. So this isn't future stuff, this is already happened. So what does a techie like me think that he could possibly do about any of this stuff? Well, it's about the data that we have, and I'll show you just some very quick examples. These are Foursquare check-ins in New York and Tokyo over a 24-hour period. They're showing not just where people are, but where they're moving to one time after another, and what they're doing, why they're going, where they're going. It's giving an insight into the behaviour of a city that we never had before. And data like this has been used to do things like look at the real end-to-end journeys people make between their homes, places of employment, shops, places of leisure, and public transport routes. Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire did this a couple of years ago, and they managed to reduce congestion across the city by 10% by better matching public transport routes to the journeys that people really wanted to undertake. And that's just one example. This is another example. This is the Billion Prices project from MIT. And what they're looking to do is get a much more dynamic, much more sophisticated view of inflation, price inflation. So they're not looking at something as simple as a typical shopping basket from a supermarket or a retail price index. They are literally monitoring in real time billions of prices from online commerce sites around the world. So by product, by sector, minute, by country, however they want to cut and dice it, they can see changes in the price that people are willing to pay for certain goods, prices they're available at. Again, information we've never had before. Another MIT project, this one indicating how resources are used. They essentially put GPS sensors on a whole bunch of things like mobile phones, batteries, whatever, stuck them in a bin and then waited to see what would happen. 2 months later, you can see just how far these things have spread from where they were released across the entire United States. And actually, some of them have already leapt off somewhere over here, out across China and Europe, and they eventually move all around the world. So once again, information that we've never had. Back to a food example. My ex-colleagues in IBM once tracked some food from farm to plate. They found that the average carrot in the United States crosses its own path 3 times in its journey from food to processing to shop to someone's house. So all of this data, all of these ideas are giving us wonderful aspirational ideas for how we could use it to make cities, towns, villages, communities better places. These are just some examples that have been published recently. So from London, Oxford, Sunderland, Bristol, Birmingham, a set of cities who have published aspirations for how technology is going to make their cities better places, stimulate the economy, address social mobility. Digital Hampshire, there's a county council doing the same thing. The Scottish government's doing it for the country, as is Singapore at the moment. Guernsey's in on the action as well with the Dandelion project. There's an island. And I'm sure there's another one. I've missed a couple off. Network Rail have a digital railway vision, which is essentially similar. Lots of energy companies have done it. Shell have done it. Most of the mobile telcos have done it. So everyone's looking at this information and technology as an amazing resource to make cities work more efficiently, cities provide better services to citizens. But what's actually happened? This is probably the biggest single consequence of some of these ideas. Sharing economy business models like Airbnb and Uber, using all of this information to create completely different ways of delivering public services, but actually in the interest of only one thing. They're essentially amoral, as any corporation is. They're driven to make a profit. And what you can see here in riots in Paris is the consequences of that innovation to existing industries. I'm not going to say whether Uber are right or wrong. I'm just pointing out they've been tremendously successful. They've got a market valuation that's at least $15 billion now, and it goes up every time someone tries to count it. We've very, very few employees, grown enormously quickly, essentially by finding a deregulated way to deliver what people want, which is private hire car journeys. Taxi industry, existing one, is absolutely up in arms because of that lack of regulation, because they are much more tightly regulated in what they can do. Here's another example, not quite so controversial, Airbnb.